Good morning, everyone. I'm truly honored to introduce you my colleague and friend, Dr. Colin Chapman, for our seminar of today. Colin received his PhD in the departments of anthropology and zoology at the University of Alberta in Canada in 1987. Currently, he holds the positions of professor in the Department of Biology, Vancouver Island University in British Columbia, Canada. He's also a fellow at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., a founding member of the International Biodiversity and Primate Conservation Center from the Dali University in Dali, China, a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, an honorary professor in the School of Life Sciences of the University of KwaZulu, Natal, in South Africa. Among his countless career achievements, he was awarded in 2018 the Konrad Adenauer Research Award from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and in 2017, the Vellen Foundation Award for distinctive and outstanding humanitarian work. And last, but far from least, he is founder and member of the board of directors of the Kibali Mobile Clinic in Uganda. This initiative is run by his research team that uses a modified ambulance as a mobile clinic to provide medical care for people living next to the Kibali. And this interaction has improved park local community relations significantly and has had the effect of reducing poaching in the area. Colin has conducted field research on primates and other species in Central America, Africa, and Asia, and has published over 580 journal articles and book chapters. Not surprisingly, he was recognized as Canada's most cited anthropologist in 2012, and more recently was ranked by Research.com as one of the top 40 researchers in ecology and evolution in the world. He has trained dozens of postdocs, masters, and PhD students, and received over $18 million in research funding. For the past more than 30 years, Colin has led the research efforts in Kibali National Park in Uganda. His talk today, titled Long-Term Monitoring of Primates and Their Environment, What Does the Future Bring?, will address exactly some of the results of this long-term project. So, Colin, please, the audience is all yours.
Okay. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Really wonderful to hear the words. So I'm going to talk about some of my long-term monitoring that I've been doing for over 30 years now. And I'll kind of go start off with a kind of introduction of why I did this work, tell you about the work, and then I'm going to kind of end with what the future can bring and how we can make the future a little bit more positive. So let's hopefully go to the next slide. So basically, just as I was being born, a French researcher said, basically, unfortunately, at the very moment when we're becoming aware of the uniqueness of primates, we're also realizing how precarious is the future of primates, and to what point competition with industrial man has threatened their survival. Can we remain unmoved by such annihilation? So this was a quote from 1962. And I'm afraid that the answer to the question at the end of it, can we remain unmoved by such an annihilation, is that we can. So this is tropical forest where I work. This is Kibali National Park, and I'll show you where this is in a minute. So it's a lush tropical rainforest. This is what we're seeing more and more today. Basically what was a rainforest that has been cleared. And to kind of put this into some concrete numbers, something like 60 million hectares of tropical rainforest was lost between 2002 and 2019. And I don't know about you, I can think of what a hectare is. A square kilometer gets a bit fuzzy. Once you talk about millions of hectares, it's totally blurry to me. This is about the size of Madagascar or one of Brazil's largest states. What does this mean in terms of primates? This tropical forest would have supported something like 15 million primates. So we've caused the death of something like that number of animals. And I always say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is Borneo from 1950 to 2020, so 70 years. And of course, green represents forest, and you can basically watch as the forest declines. This is the Ivory Coast, and this is just in 25 years. So this is from West Africa. And you can see in 1990, there's lots of forest. In 2015, there's very little forest, and only the big blocks of forest are remaining in national parks. And of course, this is the situation you probably know very well. This is the original forest cover from Brazil and current forest cover. So we often think about climate change. So just kind of give you kind of impact of what this could mean. Deforestation in the tropics releases that huge number of metric tons of carbon each year. And this is 6 times the amount of carbon released by the cars and trucks on Canada's roads every year. The numbers that I've just been quoting does not include the area that's logged, because officially what people consider deforestation is when there's literally no trees left. And this is a kind of situation. This is a picture from Congo. Something like 6 million hectares of tropical forest logged each year. So again, a huge area. These estimates do not include the area that's lost to bushmeat hunting. And it's very hard to get numbers on bushmeat hunting. This is some images. If you're don't like nice images, these next couple of images are kind of gross. This is images from the back of a truck in Congo. This is an image of a chimpanzee that's going to go into basically into the cooking pot. I tried to get a picture of the chimpanzee, and of course, all the kids want their picture taken too. This is how bushmeat is typically sold. It's often sold dried. And in Kibale, we often have situations where animals are maimed by snares. So this is a chimpanzee that stepped in a snare or put her hand in a snare. The snare wire, she was strong enough to be able to pull the snare away from its connections, but the wire became embedded in her hand, and basically, as you see, the fingers have basically rotted off. Put this into a little bit of perspective. Bushmeat involves something like 2 million tons, 2.5 million tons of bushmeat are taken from Central Africa each year. And, again, tons are abstract numbers to me. So this is something like 5 million cattle or 7 billion hamburgers. But also to put it in perspective, people in the US eat this many hamburgers in just 50 days. So that kind of puts it in perspective, both how much is being eaten and how much is taken out. These estimates do not include what's going to happen because of climate change. And the Earth's climate has warmed by almost 1.5 degrees in the past 100 years. And some estimates suggest that the climate will warm by 4.5 degrees this coming century. These next couple of slides are estimates of basically predicted warming in places where primates occur. The darker the red basically means the higher the temperature will get, the higher the temperature change. So you can pick the kind of the area you want to look at, and we'll see how things are going to change with respect to primates. So this is predicted change. This is the number of primate species. So keep an eye on Madagascar, because Madagascar has lots of primate species. And as you'll see, this again is predicted change. Madagascar is going to get a lot of change. And this is the number of endangered primate species. So again, Madagascar has lots of endangered species, and it's going to experience lots of change. Brazil is going to be impacted quite dramatically. This is the temperature warming. This is predictions of changes in precipitation, so basically rainfall. So we again have certain places of the world that are going to get a lot less rainfall. So Brazil is going to be one of those locations. Southern Mexico, which is already fairly dry, Yucatan Peninsula is going to get drier, and there really are some scary predictions out there. So these are a couple of very well-respected biologists. Joe Wright is from the Smithsonian, and they estimated that 75% of all tropical forests present today basically will experience temperatures that are higher than those that are presently supporting close canopy forest by the year 2100. So that's some scary predictions. So what do I kind of think should be done in terms of research? What have I been doing? I want to study change. So I don't want to just document change or just understand what that change is. I want to be able to predict it. Because when you can predict the change, you can actually do something. You can say change will occur if we don't act. So I want to be able to say, okay, we should act, and be able to say how we should act before we're actually facing kind of dramatic negative change. So for the rest of the talk, what I'll talk about is forest change, climate change. This is all in Kibale National Park, and the overall impact on primate populations. And then I'll talk about what can be done. So let's start off with talking about forest change. So I went to Kibale National Park in 1989. So Kibale is in East Africa, and the park is at the very west side of that country. And when I first went there, I set up a series of vegetation plots. And I've monitored those vegetation plots repeatedly from 1989 to 2001. We'll do it again in a couple of years. And we've been able to document change and understand what's driving some of that change. So primates themselves are driving change. So this is a black and white colobus monkey, and he's eating flowers. They love eating some of these big flowers. And in fact, what they'll do is they'll eat literally all the flowers on the tree. If you eat all the flowers in the tree, the fruit can't get pollinated, and the fruit doesn't get set, and the plant doesn't have any seeds to grow out. So this is one example of one species. This is Markhamia. This is density over time. If you look inside the forest, the animals are eating all the flowers. If you go outside of the forest, where they're in farmers' fields, where there's still some Markhamia trees, the plant is setting flowers. There's lots of fruits and lots of seedlings. In the park, there's simply no seedlings. And as trees get older, the population of Markhamia trees is declining. In Kibale, elephant density is increasing, and it's actually increasing quite dramatically. Let me just be clear, throughout Africa and Asia, the number of elephants are declining dramatically. So this is not a wide trend for elephant numbers to increase, but in Kibale, the elephant numbers have been increasing in abundance. So this is a very positive thing for elephants and for the park because they're protected. But elephants will eat the bark from trees. They basically will strip the bark from the tree. And if they eat the bark all the way around the tree, it really basically causes the trees to death. So elephants are dramatically changing the nature of the forest that the primates I work on are in. So climate change. I must admit, I wasn't brilliant back in 1989 and said I should study climate change. I just started studying different things and the climate change, so I could document what was its impact. So I'll talk about climate change and how it influences plant chemistry, how that chemistry should impact the primates, changes in the fruiting patterns, and then how climate change may be influencing disease. So Kibale's climate is changing. We have basically about 300 more millimeters of rainfall a year than we did at the turn of the century. And this is the rainfall data. And as you can see, this is a fairly consistent increase in rainfall. This means there's also been less frequent droughts, the earlier onset of the rainy season. We've had about a 1.1 degree increase in the average maximum monthly temperature. So Kibale's climate is changing. What is the impact of this on plant chemistry? Well, there's been a number of very nice detailed studies done in greenhouses where you can nicely control the environment of plants and see what happens. So you grow up a plant, you can increase the temperature, you can increase how much you water it, and you can seal the plant off from the natural environment, and you can increase the carbon dioxide. And so what these greenhouse experiments have shown is that with increasing temperature, rainfall, or carbon dioxide, you get a decrease in protein. And of course, protein is important for an animal. You also get an increase in fiber. Fiber for most species is indigestible, or at least some components of it are. So it means that's worse diets. And tannins are a chemical that bind protein. So if you increase the amount of tannins, you basically decrease the availability of protein even more. So when you have a dry glass of red wine, but you're tasting tannins. If you eat a green banana and your mouth goes dry, those are the tannins actually binding the protein in your mouth. So this is the greenhouse experiments. What do we find in Kibale? Exactly the same thing. So between 1994 and 2009, we basically have an increase in fiber and a decrease in protein. So what does this mean for the primates? Well, basically, we concentrated on two species, the red colobus and black and white colobus, because these species are eating leaves, and we can document easily what happened to leaf chemistry. So back in 1996, we did a survey of the park of these different areas, and we documented primate densities. And the first two bars are red colobus and black and white colobus. And as you'll see, there's quite a bit of variation across the park. So that's kind of nice from my perspective, because we can try to understand what causes that variation. And so the first thing I said, well, obviously it's going to be related to the amount of food that's available. So we related the colobus biomass to the cumulative DBH of food trees. DBH is the diameter of breast height. So you can basically consider it the cumulative size of trees that are in the forest. And the simple prediction was, the more trees there are, the more larger the trees there are, the more food there'll be. And there's a nice relationship if you just ignore the Dura River. And I must admit, when I first started, first kind of published this paper, I said, well, maybe something unusual's happened at the Dura River. Maybe there's a disease outbreak, or predators came through and wiped out the population. But it bothered me. We only have 7 points on this graph. So I was basically throwing out 1 point. So I wanted to study it a little bit further to see if there was evidence of disease or for something else. And one thing that occurred to me is that it could be not just the amount of food, but the quality of food. And colobus have a specialized digestive tract. They have a really large forestomach that's designed to basically break down some of the fiber and allow the animals to get energy from that fiber. This compares it to a red-tailed monkey, which has a digestive system more like ours, which can use basically more easily available sugars that are available in fruits. And so to start with, I went to 4 sites and I looked at the protein and fiber in the leaves that the colobus ate. And again, I related the colobus biomass to the protein to fiber ratio. So protein they want, fiber they don't. And what we found for these 4 sites is the Dura River has lots of food, but it's low quality food. It has very low levels of protein and high levels of fiber. And I always want to make recommendations to the park, what they should do, or make recommendations that conservation agencies can act on. And if you have 4 points, hopefully conservation agencies wouldn't listen to me. So what I did is I spent the next, I don't know, I think 15, 20 years collecting more data points. And this is the relationship between protein, fiber, and colobus biomass. And we can explain about 87% of the biomass of these primates based on the quality of food that's available. So this is useful information, and we can actually use this information, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. We also documented changing fruiting patterns. So for the fruit-eating monkeys in Kibale, this is the relationship between average kind of rainfall and the percent of ripe fruit. So as you get more rain, you get less ripe fruit. It's probably because rain is associated with increasing cloud, and the cloud basically doesn't allow the fruit to get enough sunlight to ripen. And you'll remember Kibale is getting wetter. So there should be less ripe fruit available for the fruit-eating primates of Kibale. We also know that wet conditions allow parasite eggs to persist for longer and thus increase the infection risk. So for parasites, for primates that are living in valley bottoms, they have higher parasite loads than those that are living in the tops of slopes. We also know that if people are becoming increasingly into contact with primates, and this leads to transmission. These are just some young children that are walking along the path with a group of chimpanzees. This is a habituated group. So does this increase disease risk? We know that Ebola, for instance, can be transmitted between primates and humans, but I like my life too much to study Ebola, so I studied something much easier, E. coli. E. coli is basically, you have E. coli, I have E. coli, birds have E. coli, primates have E. coli. It's fairly widespread in all our digestive tracts. But if populations are separated for a long period of time, the E. coli populations basically start differing genetically, simply by genetic drift. So what we did is a very simple study. We went out and we collected fecal samples from primates and humans and compared them. And this is just a simplified version. The red bars represent red colobus, black bars represent black and white colobus, and the gray bars represent humans. And as you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, you can basically see that there's a mix. So within kind of these letter blocks, which are not statistically different within the block, you'll find red colobus and black and white colobus and humans within the same block. So there has been exchange of fecal material, probably through water, between primates and humans. So what are the overall impact of this on primates? So this is really, kind of the bottom line. And we have changing plant chemistry. We have the primates relying on the plant chemistry. It's changing in a negative way, changing fruiting patterns, increasing disease. So what's the impact? Basically nothing. This is the primate numbers from 1996 to, I guess, 2 years ago. And the populations are really pretty stable. So this is the 5 common primates within Kibale. Each of them is separately color-coded, and you can see the images on the bottom. And the populations are more or less stable. So what we would predict? We would predict the primate population should be declining since their foods are getting scarce and less nutritious, and they have more diseases, but their populations are stable. This is really good news. Because it suggests that primates are basically being able to modify their system in some way so that they can adapt to these sorts of changes, these negative changes. So that's kind of what this long-term research has shown. But I also want to talk about kind of what can be done about kind of the issues I talked about, starting with, which is basically things like deforestation and the loss of primate numbers. One thing that I'll say is important, particularly for parks, is that you have to have enforcement. So these are park guards, and they've just arrested a poacher, and they basically will be taking him into the law enforcement to be prosecuted. You'll note something interesting about this image. The guards are sitting around fairly relaxed with their rifles, but they haven't taken the weapons away from the poacher. So there is a level of kind of trust in some ways between these people. So I don't study encroachment. If I did any work on encroachment, people wouldn't then trust me. They wouldn't tell me about it. So people will tell me about poaching. So I basically don't tell the Park Service is what I learned. So we need to have enforcement, but research is also useful. So this is the relationship I showed you between colobus biomass and the quality of their food. We've used this information. So prior to when Kibale became a national park in 1993, about 140 square kilometers in the south, primarily in the south of Kibale, was degraded. And we've been working to replant this forest, and we've used the information from what represents high protein and fiber foods to replant these forests. This is all part of a carbon offset project, so mostly the Dutch government is paying for the project. But we've, so far, through collaborations, and basically planted about 1.9 million seedlings. And we've planted a lot of those seedlings. We've selected species that are good for the endangered colobus species. We just got a new grant this year to plant another 80,000 per year for the next, hopefully, 20 years. So we use this sort of scientific information to basically make gains on how we should be managing the park. And what we've shown is that 20 years after replanting, primate population in these restored forests is almost equal to that of old growth forest for all the species except for one. So it's really a positive kind of trend that shows that primates can recover population size quite quickly if these forests are managed well. The other thing we can do is training. And I think I can't understate the value of training. And I am absolutely certain that my students have done more conservation work than I have. So the person shown in this picture is a person called Arthur Mugisha. Arthur was one of my students. He got his PhD. He went back to Uganda and became the executive director of the national parks, which is called Ugandan Wildlife Authority. So he basically had a huge role in setting up a lot of the national parks within Uganda. So training can play a huge difference. We can take part in education projects, and hopefully some of you will recognize one of the people in this image. The person third along from the right is Juan Carlos Siria Silva. And Juan Carlos, a friend of mine, and he runs some great education projects. He's helped us with an education project over in Africa, and he's very skilled at kind of getting information across and motivating people to think about the environment and to think about primates. And this is where it counts. We can do things like work with some of the more popular media, so National Geographic. I worked with National Geographic for 9 years, and National Geographic, of course, gets the magazine and the TV station out to millions of people. So we can share messages in that way. So that's something the academics can do and make a big contribution to wide audiences. We can help with setting up research stations. Universities are often willing to help support research stations. So we can help with research stations. And this is an image done by one of my students. And basically what he did is he followed the flow of cash benefits from the research station out to the local villages. So the research station employs about 40 people. Through that employment, the money is kind of trickles out into the village. So if someone is working full time at the research station, he can't tend his crops, so he hires someone to help tend his crops. He then hires someone to take his kids to school. So the money trickles out and really funds 7 times more people than actually are directly employed. So research stations can have a huge benefit to local communities. And we need to work with those communities. Let me kind of give you a couple of examples of what we're doing. This is a person called Joseph Berhunga, and this is his second wife, and I'm not sure how many children there are there. There's 3, 4, 5, nope, 6. So this is 6 children, and Joseph is the local, basically the local mayor, and as you can see, Joseph is not all that wealthy. So we can work with these communities to try to increase their quality of life, with the idea that increasing their quality of life will mean that they're more favorable to the park. If they're more favorable to the park, hopefully they won't do negative things to the park, like poach animals or take out firewood. And it is the local community that is setting these snares that I talked about earlier. This is one of the field assistants taking apart a snare or collecting firewood. So if they basically need firewood, they're not supposed to take it from the park, so we can basically convince them not to if there's a better relationship between the local community and the park. So some of the things we've done, one of the most successful things we did is in 1992, I guess, we started setting up an ecotourism project, not at the research site, but just south of it. And that's become extremely profitable, both for the community and for the actual government. When I first kind of saw where the funding was going, where the tourist dollars was going, I was a little depressed because very little went to the local community. But then I realized that the government was really, really happy that so much tourist dollar was coming in, and ministers were benefiting, hotels were benefiting, business was benefiting, and that made the government happy, kind of for increasing GDP. That is probably the most important thing, because that means the national government will help support the park, and that's what's been happening. Well, one of the things that was mentioned in my introduction is we became concerned about health. So we're thinking, could we increase the health of the local community? So what's the health situation? About 26% of the children under the age of 5 are malnourished. 13% of all deaths amongst children under 5 is caused by malaria. That can be easily treated or prevented. So you can prevent it just with a mosquito net or treat it with simple drugs. And I have no idea why I took this picture. I'm sure it's not for what it depicts, but this really illustrates how education about health can be important. People have just been watering their cattle in this stream. There are people collecting, doing their laundry, and there are people basically getting drinking water. So there's no better way to transmit gastrointestinal parasite than this sort of situation. So we can teach people about these sorts of things and hopefully improve the quality of their health. Well, where we worked, the average distance to the nearest hospital was about 10 kilometers. This is a woman who was going to go to hospital, but riding on the back of a bicycle for 10 kilometers along bumpy roads. We gave her a ride, but it probably would not have been a comfortable thing to do. So could we help improve the health needs of a local community? So what we did 17 years ago now is we held benefit dinners and other fundraisers back here in Canada. And we basically raised funds to build a clinic. So this is a simple clinic that we built back in 17 years ago. We built the clinic. We hired nurse dentist who still works for us today. And then what we did is we got a mobile clinic, which is an ambulance, a converted ambulance shown here, that travels around the park, giving medical services, education to the villages around the park. And you'll notice something about the clinic. You'll notice it's being staffed by park rangers. So this is their uniforms. It doesn't have anything associated with my name, or the fact that we Rose got the money for it. It says Ugandan Wildlife Authority. This is run by the park services. We help support it, but the credit of it goes to the national park, which is really the critical thing to have happen. So people hopefully appreciate the healthcare they're getting, and because of that, they'll be nicer to the park. We have done some amazing things. Our nurse dentist has done some amazing things. So hopefully with that, we have decreased the amount of poaching that's occurring in the park. And I think my timing is about right, because I like to leave lots of time for questions. And so I can stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions, get comments or whatever. So I'll stop sharing.
Excellent.
There we go.
Thank you, Colin. Let me just put everyone on the screen, or at least here. So we are open to questions. You can either write or talk directly. I have a few, but let's wait for the others to participate.
Sure. If people put them in the chat, maybe if you can read them out to me, and I'll answer them when you read them.
Yeah. I'll be attentive here. Let's just give them some time because they are normally shy. Okay, let's see what Lucero has said. Thank you very much. I have a question. When you start to work with the communities, how did you work with the local or national authorities? Good question, Lucero.
Well, I started working with the communities kind of in a grassroots way. So I had hired some local villagers to help us, watching monkeys, cutting trails, doing plant phenology, that sort of thing. And those were respected men in the community, and they were kind of my gateway into the community. So really, when I wanted to go talk to the local authorities, I went with my local field assistants. They introduced me. It gives a level of trust. So there became a level of trust between kind of being introduced by someone they knew and the local communities. Some of the researchers before the local community actually thought they were mining gold. Because why would you go into the forest so much and just come out with a truck? You had to be coming out with something very precious. So the local community actually thought we were mining gold, which wasn't the case. But that's, they couldn't understand why we do research. So that's how I dealt with the local communities. When I dealt with the national community, national authorities, I did that through the park services. The park services was very easy to work with. They were, just starting off. They basically were founded in 1993. And so they were really eager to get any help they could get. So I worked through them. So, I couldn't go talk to a minister. Well, they actually, when I first got in the country, the ministers kind of came and said, "What are you doing here?" But after that, it was done through the National Park Services. And I also went and talked to people with them.
And did they ended understanding that live primates are worth gold for us and start to conserve? Or
I think they started understanding the value of primates because we started bringing field courses there. So they saw all these international people coming. Why are these students coming to our forest? And the students would talk to the local community, and they started to understand that people thought this was really valuable. And then once the ecotourism projects got started, they really realized the value of the park potentially to them, and particularly in terms of jobs.
excellent. Eliane, do you want to make a question? Professor Eliane.
My getting sunrise here, so I'll just move a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I just thank you for the speech. It was very good. The part that I could attend to. Thank you. It's interesting to see this other area. I'm from another different subject, but was very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Eliane.
One of the nice things about working in Kibale is that you start getting intrigued about other things. So I noticed the red-tailed monkeys were eating less insects. So I went, well, why? And so we then studied the insect communities. There was a study done in 1980, did sweep nets in the forest and basically quantified the amount of insects. So we just redid that study and showed that the insect populations have basically crashed in the forest, probably because they started using pesticides.
Interesting.
I understand very little about primates, but working with Julio Cesar, bring something, we have some work together with plants and primates. I'm on the side of the plants and he's on the side of the primates.
Yeah.
Fernanda Paim, do you want to make any question, comment, or anything from your experience with Colin and Kibale? Okay, I have several questions. Well, a few questions actually, but there's some. During this past 30, well, I can make later. Vinicius will make a question. Go ahead, Vinicius.
Okay. Hi, Colin. Thanks for the talk. It was great. I have actually two questions. Is more specific. I want to know which kind of techniques are you using to study parasite sharing between humans and non-human primates, and which kind of disease did you found in this population?
So to start off with, what we did is we looked at gastrointestinal parasites. So it's relatively easy to collect the fecal samples and then basically identify the eggs that are in the fecal samples. However, I then kind of started working with a geneticist, and we basically found out that a type of parasite called trichuris. The eggs are very distinctive. You can't miss them. It's great. They go, oh, trichuris. We then found out that there were 4 types of trichuris, but we couldn't identify them from the egg morphology. So we then started looking at more at the genetics. And when I realized I really had to do more genetics and I had to have genetic collaborators, I started doing less because I really needed bigger grants to do the genetics. So it became much more complicated. So really, I think you really have to you can identify the first forms, great with the gastrointestinal analysis, but then you need to kind of do genetic analysis.
Vinicius just finished his PhD. He's now a Dr. Vinicius, and worked on parasite sharing between howlers and domestic animals from creation. So he's interested in. We are trying also
The
to.
thing I know you're interested in is the fact that when people find out they can share diseases, it can be either it can make them intrigued, or they can be very negative. So Ebola in Africa has not the fact that you can get it between animals and people is a pretty negative thing. I once gave a talk at the it's basically the Center for Disease Control in Canada. And I told him about all these diseases, and one of the questions were, why don't you just shoot the monkeys? And I just, yeah, that was their perspective on things.
Because monkeys are worth gold.
Yes.
Fernanda sent you here. Hi, Colin. Thank you so much for your talk. I have 2 questions about ecotourism. When did this activity started, and if the team has some plan to monitor impacts on primate populations? Thank you.
Okay, well, Fernanda, I'll just tell everyone, Fernanda came up and was in Montreal with me for a while, came over to Africa. So she's has some experience of this location. It was started, I guess, about 1991, 92 is when we started it. It took a few years to habituate the animals. And so it really didn't get going until around 1996 to 2000 when it started picking up. It would have been nice if we did kind of some baseline studies to see how the primate populations were responding. We didn't. So there's no kind of before and after studies to say what's been the impact. We can say, however, poaching in that area is very low. And we can say that the forest has regenerated around that area. But we didn't do the needed studies.
Thank you. Okay, I'll make my question while others try to do theirs. How was human population growth near or around Kibale during this past 30 years?
Basically, right now around Kibale, the human population is about 200 people per square kilometer, and the doubling time is 20 years.
Okay, and
so every 20 years it doubles.
So it was something like, well, 30–40% less in 30 years. In the past, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
so this is kind of I've worked a little bit with a Brazilian researcher called Carlos Perez, and we kind of like thinking about conservation strategies. And it's really interesting because he'll say a strategy and I'll go, what? That'll never work because our population densities are so different. So, we often get ideas of strategies from one location and think they'll apply elsewhere. Particularly, primatology is particularly bad of taking things that work in North America and say they'll work in the tropics. We really have to fine tune each of our strategies to the particular location, and we often don't do that. So it's just kind of a comment about, population densities can differ dramatically, and that really says what you can do.
And what's the religion around this area? What religion?
Mostly Christian.
Mostly Christian. And are the Christians there, the priests and nuns, in favor of birth control or something, supporting, enforcing this, or they are doing the opposite?
There's the Catholic Church is there, and they're not in favor of birth control. But basically they take on Christianity, but they take on parts of Christianity that they want. So you could have 2 wives and be Christian, that sort of thing. So it's loosely defined. However, we did a big push through the health center to promote birth control. We had basically birth control clinics and all sorts of things. But particularly the men still want to have big families.
Yeah,
So it's a cultural thing to have for men to have lots of children.
yeah, because probably they are harvesting things yet, or they are not having a better quality of life, right? That was another
Yeah.
question. How has changed, or if it has improved or deteriorated as the population grew, if the quality of life has remained stable, improved, or
Mhm.
uh,
Well,
got worse?
when I first went there, basically, Uganda had just finished its civil war. So they had Idi Amin and Bote. And at that time, the country was in kind of pretty bad shape. And so the economy of Uganda has really increased well. So when I first went there, everyone was living in mud houses with grass roofs. Now people often have brick houses with, tin roofs. So it has increased dramatically, but land has become extremely scarce. So what's happened is the families got so big that men used to basically divide their land amongst their sons. They can't do that anymore because the amount of land they have is just for one family. So that means particularly the sons go off and work in the capital city, try to make a living that way. However, what's also happened is there's been a boom in the middle class in Uganda. And so the middle class are often buying land and putting things like eucalyptus plantations in. So again, there's been a crunch for land in our area. Of course, this means that there's more pressure on the park because the people that are living there are now starting to struggle more. So that means that they got to get their firewood somewhere, they have to get their protein somewhere. So it's a continuous battle, really, because of human population density is increasing.
And are there any hope that things will improve in terms of education and all this in the near or in some 1 or 2 decades, or do you think that the same trend will continue?
Population size is slowly decreasing, the population growth. And hopefully it'll decrease more. And birth control is readily available now in Uganda. So if the people want it, it's a very low price and it's readily available. So I'm hopeful.
Good. So another question. What happened if a guard votes behind the scenes? What kind of enforcement or punishment do they receive, or does this exist or occur, or how do you control for that?
It does exist. So they have been caught poaching, and basically the upper authorities deal extremely harshly, and basically they're going to be a jail sentence. So it has happened. The thing is, it's difficult to find out it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very complicated because they are the ones who are taking care and they are doing the bad things. So it's like
Yeah,
who who will who will monitor them? Lara,
yeah.
thank you a lot for the talk, and Bruno also thank you for the talk and mentioned that he really enjoyed your information, and he asked what you think are the next steps, both in terms of research and measures for the conservation of Kibale Forest.
Okay, I'll start with conservation. I think kind of two things need to kind of go hand in hand. So there's lots of area within Kibale that can be restored. So 140 square kilometers is a huge area. And so we can really work on restoring that area. And so that's kind of going to be my priority for kind of the conservation side. But the flip side of that is we have to really continue to work with the local communities to provide them things they want. And it's a little bit tricky because people often say, well, if you provide them a good protein supply, they won't poach meat. Well, if you offer them a good protein supply, they'll be very healthy and very good, great, but they'll also want a motorbike. And to get a motorbike, you can sell bushmeat. So to put your children in school, make it a little bit nicer. If you want to put your child through school, one way to do it would be to sell bushmeat. So we have to continuously work with the local community to make sure they appreciate the park, make sure that they don't want to cause it harm. For research, I think kind of the next big thing to try to understand is to use some of this long-term data to understand both what's the impact of climate change, because it's going to be coming more and more rapidly, and also what strategies did the primates use to be able to basically adjust to the changes that have occurred already. You know, why I don't really know why their populations didn't decline. So we have some long-term behavioral data that we can analyze to study, how did they manage to do so well? It's really positive they did, but how did they do it? And which species will continue to be able to adapt and which species might not be able to? And so that, I think, is kind of the next thing that I really want to do.
And how about the increase in phenolics that you have detected, that with more rain and the higher temperatures, plants are producing more phenolics? Has this trend changed the diet of primates? They are eating other leaves, or at least decreasing the importance of the species that produce phenolics in their diets, or it's also the same?
It's really hard to tell because so we have one study group we've been studying for almost 20 years now, and they shift their home range a little bit every year. They're never exactly in the same spot. So if they shift their home range, they move to areas where there's different tree species. So that means their diet changes just because they shifted their home range. So understanding why their diet changed, are they avoiding the phenolics, or is there just there's other plants that are there? We haven't been able to tease that apart yet. So you really would need kind of mapping, really detailed mapping of 4 or 5 square kilometers of all the adult trees, and we haven't done that yet.
And if the population is stable, but they are changing home range, so it's possible to say also that the populations are at the carrying capacity of the forest. So this is a strategy they are doing, maybe exactly to cope with all these challenges. So it's interesting.
It could be that our group is fairly large. Because of that, they basically win in kind of territorial encounters. And so maybe they're just going to the good places. So it's a really important question, but a really hard one to address.
I have another question in terms of the training of you trained many African graduate students. What happened to them after graduating? Did they return? If they return to Africa, are they finding good jobs or faculty jobs in Uganda and other places, or are they changing to do something else?
That's a really good question. And something I'm working on with colleagues from China actually is to study there's always talk about kind of parachute research or neocolonial research and the need for training. And often we think about we should train more and more and more, but that's not necessarily the answer if those students don't have places to go get jobs. So I have never trained, I've trained one primatologist in Uganda, that's all. I've trained foresters, I've trained people who do ecotourism, I've trained people who got an MBA, I've trained people on insects. So I've diversified my training. Almost all have gone on to good jobs, but only a couple of them have gone on to university jobs. A lot of them have gone into the park services, so they're more conservation oriented. I have one of my students was great at statistics. He's now in the Ministry of Finance, and he's the statistician, one of the head statisticians for Uganda. So I think when we think about training, we have to think about diverse training, particularly for a small country like Uganda. And we don't just need to train the next professors. So it has to be diverse training but also to stop kind of what we've been calling, kind of people have been talking about neocolonial attitudes, is we shouldn't just be relying on the professors to do training. We need to do things like build infrastructure in the country. There has to be jobs for people to go to. And so that's one of the key things that I think we need to do. And one thing that I see, I'll walk on thin ice, as we say in Canada. We've been often saying we should kind of punish research that don't publish with in-country people. Yeah, that okay. All that'll happen then is people will cheat and put names of in-country people on their papers. What we need to do is we need to have positive things to promote real, true collaboration and to measure true collaboration. I don't think punishment will work. So that's just a personal opinion.
That's interesting. That I had this impression that they were not getting jobs in Uganda, at least in their training. But do you know anything about? Let's say I was very interested in this guy that there's a statistician one who went to the finance minister.
Yeah.
Do you know if the person has any possibility of trying to bring his knowledge on conservation and trying to change the minds of people who do not mind about conservation, but they are in a is important position, say, okay, let's try to do this or that. Is it possible? Because this would be ideal.
Yes, he does. And he is quite influential in kind of helping push for funding for the park services and that sort of thing. So, although he's not in academia, he's done really, really well. So, I think, people who've gone on to really good jobs in other sorts of things. Uganda has one really good university, but there's now other universities popping up. So things are pretty good in Uganda for, the training goes places.
It's interesting because then is a side effect, but with much better results than if the person was in an university teaching statistics and ecology or something like that. So it's a very good side effect.
One thing that I will kind of I don't know, highlight is that in my opinion, in North America, so the US and Canada, and I think in Europe, it's very difficult to get funding to support host country students because foreign tuition is really, really high. A lot of the granting agencies won't support foreign students. So it becomes really difficult to get it. And it's actually, I think, becoming more and more difficult. So, that's one of the things I think we need to be more conscious about. I'm finding it's in general becoming more difficult to find funding overall. So a lot of foundations in North America are closing their doors or shifting between accepting unsolicited proposals to just funding people they know. So
and can this trend be exactly because the institutions and the granting agencies know that once they invest all this money to train people, they go back to their countries and they don't have a job that is comparable to what they should be doing? Maybe because then it's like sparing money. It's like by luck you'd have some that would actually.
It could contribute to it. Yeah.
Interesting. Anybody has another question? I have another one. Let's see. Shy people. Okay, I'll make mine. It was my first actually, and I found very interesting. The fact that the black and white, I'm with howlers in my mind. Black and white colobus monkeys are eating all flowers of Markhamia trees. And they are not producing fruit. And then there is no recruitment of new seedlings and so no recovery of Markhamia population. What's the importance of Markhamia trees to the diet of black and white colobus? And is this changing once the species is decreasing in representation, the community.
Right. I can say that it's often in the top 10 plant foods eaten in a month. So it is fairly important in terms of frequency with which they eat it. And if it's changing, I haven't looked at it.
Okay. And
One interesting thing is, so, okay, they're eating the flowers, so it's not setting fruit, so the recruitment of the plant's going down. How did Markhamia get there to start with? So was 200 years ago, the monkey population is way lower, so you actually got the trees recruiting? How did you get the trees there to start with? I have no idea. It's just kind of a funny paradox.
Yeah, that's interesting. And let me see what else in this. It was something related to that and the Markhamia. So they are eating, not recruiting. When they eat the Markhamia flowers, are there other flowers available in the forest, or they focus on Markhamia? There are no others, or there are others that they can replace if the Markhamia disappears, for example.
There's only a few species that have really big flowers, and they seem to like all the big flowered fruits, flowered species. So there's no other kind of flowering species that they could shift onto.
Yeah, then if the Markhamia disappears, it will be bad for black and white,
Yes.
or can they
Yeah.
replace it with something else?
They might be able to replace it with some other type of leaf, not a flower.
So if there is
So
something important in the flowers, they won't get.
maybe, we don't know. Yeah.
That's interesting. Sad. Well,
Yeah. But
any
they seem to be doing okay. The numbers are still high. So
yeah,
that's,
they're still stable. So it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
maybe it's
they're doing something.
yeah, or maybe it wasn't time yet to show problems of
Yes.
in breeding or something. I don't know. Interesting. Any other question, everyone? Okay, nobody. Okay, so Colin, thank you very, very much. It was a great pleasure and honor having you here. It's like
Pleasure.
I'm very happy that you could do that early in the morning because, well, it's not 6 a.m. at least. It's now
Yes.
less worse. It's 7 a.m. Now it's 8 something. So it's like a good time. It would be
Yeah. So I'll
crazier
start
if,
off by having my breakfast and you guys can have a nice lunch.
yeah, exactly. So thank you very much and see you soon in a meeting or Kibali or I don't know where.
Be great to get to the Kibale.
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
It was a pleasure
Bye-bye.
talking to you.
Thank you all
Bye-bye.
very
Bye,
much.
thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay, I'll end this. Bye-bye, everyone.